Just a gentle note before we begin today. We'll be talking about boundaries, people-pleasing, codependent patterns, and recovery. Please listen in a way that feels supportive for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. There's a moment a lot of caregivers know too well. Someone asks for just one more thing, and there's a tone in the room that says, "Don't disappoint me." And even if your body is already running on empty, the yes comes out automatically. Not because you're weak, not because you don't know what boundaries are, but because for many caregivers, saying no doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it can feel unsafe. Unsafe to be judged, unsafe to be misunderstood, unsafe to be the bad one in the family, unsafe to risk conflict when you're already holding so much. And that's why today's episode matters, because boundaries aren't just about words. They're about internal safety. My guest today is Barb Nangle. Barb is a boundaries coach, speaker, author, and podcaster, and a former people-pleasing rescuer who entered 12-step recovery later in life and discovered something that decades of insight and self-improvement didn't fully shift. The issue wasn't effort. It was the absence of internal safety. And when we build that safety from the inside, we can become emotionally available, loving, and steady without disappearing in the process. This episode is for the caregiver who wants to keep their soft heart, but stop living in automatic yeses, guilt spirals, and quiet resentment. Barb, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And what an incredibly beautiful way you introduced me. I loved how you said that. You said it almost better than I say it myself, maybe even better.
Thank you very much. Barb, I'd like to start for anyone meeting you for the first time. Can you share a little bit of your own turning point? What was happening in your life when you realized boundaries weren't just a communication skill, but the thing that created internal safety? And what led you to dedicate your work to helping others build that too?
So those are three very separate points in time. So you mentioned that I learned how to build boundaries through 12-step recovery. And I say that I learned how to build them vicariously going through the 12 steps of recovery. But what got me into 12-step recovery was I hit what I call a codependent bottom. And just so we're all on the same page about what I mean when I say codependence, my understanding of codependence is that when we're codependent, we are really fixated on everything outside of ourselves to the neglect of ourselves. So we pay attention to what does he want? What does she want? What do they want? We're obsessed with what other people are thinking and doing, often what they're thinking about us, to the point where we don't even really think about things like, what do I want or need here? And we end up neglecting ourselves. And so I had volunteered to serve on a project serving homeless people in my church. And right around that same time, a homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner. And he and I became very friendly. And I remember thinking it was like, oh, God had brought this person at just the right time to help me understand the plight of homeless people, so that when I'm serving homeless people, I'm serving homeless people, not, quote, the homeless. And it was true. He actually was very helpful in that regard. Well, a few months into my friendship with him, Michelle, we had a really massive snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut. And I invited Dan to stay at my home. And I now know that is not normal to invite a homeless person to stay in your home. And of course, he said yes. And then I invited him to stay another time and another time. And within a few weeks, he was practically living with me. And I soon felt trapped in my own home. So he was an admitted alcoholic and drug addict. I think now on reflection, he may have also had some kind of a personality disorder, because this guy messed with my head in a way I had never experienced. And one day, while talking about him in therapy to my therapist, I went, my God, do you think I need to go to Al-Anon? And she said, yes. So do you think people are likely familiar with Al-Anon, or should I say a little bit about that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So in terms of 12-step recovery, the very first 12-step recovery program ever developed is called Alcoholics Anonymous. Most people have heard of that. It was created in the 1930s in the United States, and it was the first time in the history of human beings that droves and droves of alcoholics got and stayed sober. And now there's some 200 and something 12-step recovery programs. But the second 12-step recovery program ever created was called Al-Anon, and it's for the loved ones of alcoholics. And here's why. Most people think, why do the loved ones of an alcoholic need a 12-step recovery program? And it's because two things. One, alcoholism is actually a family disease. We tend to think of the drinking behavior of the drinker is the alcoholism, and that's the only problem. That's actually the tip of the iceberg symptom of the problem. And two, the things we do sort of naturally to try to help our loved one to get sober, stay sober, stop drinking, get into rehab, get into detox, go to meetings, go to recovery, actually turn into us trying to be controlling of that person. And we often say things like, well, I was just trying to help. And so we start to focus entirely on them and what they're doing or not doing to the neglect of ourselves. And they start feeling controlled because that's what we're trying to do. So we get resentful of them because of how much effort we're putting into their recovery and they're not listening to us. And they get resentful of us because they feel controlled. And then they use that resentment against us as another excuse to drink, and it turns into this vicious cycle. So I had heard of Al-Anon, and I said that to my therapist, and she said, yes. So whatever I put into Google when I got home, Michelle, looking for Al-Anon, I came across this word codependent, and I was like, what? Now, I was 52 when this happened. I'm 63 now. And I had been in therapy since I was about 15. I had read a gajillion self-help books, did all the things, seminars and workshops and work groups. And I had never heard this word. And I was astonished. So I started going to Codependents Anonymous. So that was the beginning of my journey. Then let me fast forward about 3 years. I had been working at Yale University for a long time, got laid off, and through a series of serendipitous events, found myself in the world of startups, entrepreneurship, and innovation in New Haven and at Yale, started my own business, very quickly started my podcast, which is called Fragmented to Whole: Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. Never occurred to me that would have anything to do with my business. That was entirely about carrying the message of recovery to those who still suffer, which is part of step 12 in 12-step recovery. Because as I said, not only did I not hear the word boundaries, but the things I learned just in my first 2 years alone in 12-step recovery were absolutely revolutionary to me. And I was someone who had been trying since I was a teen to get better, be better, self-improve and all that stuff. And so I thought there's all this wisdom in recovery I want to get out there. And I didn't initially start as a boundaries coach. I started just as a life coach. And then I realized, oh, you have to actually have a niche. And it just made sense for me to become a boundaries coach. So this is May of 2026. And it wasn't until last year in 2025. And I think it was while I was guesting on another podcast that I had this massive insight that boundaries are really about creating a sense of internal safety. It was an experience I had had, but I didn't have the language for it. So we can talk more about what all that means, but that's like, those were 3 very separate points in time.
I really like how you're talking about the time, because I think for many caregivers, it takes so much time to get where we are, close to burnout or in burnout, because we're constantly saying yes before we catch and realize that we are doing everything for everybody and we've forgotten about our importance and our health and our well-being holistically, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And I think people are looking for a quick fix. They're looking for that snap moment that's just going to make everything better. And I think when we talk about time, it's really important for carers and non-caregivers to understand that it's going to take even more time to undo, to relearn, to learn something new than what it was to create the problem in the first place. Because any new habit can take up to 90 days to kind of set in and become more of a pattern, but it still takes conscious work and effort when you've been doing something for, say, 20 years because you're a lifelong haul caregiver. So, Barb, you said that you were a former people-pleasing rescuer. Caregivers often hear just set boundaries and feel like it's a personal failure that they can't. What do you see in caregivers specifically? What makes boundaries so hard in caregiving compared to other areas of life?
So before I answer that, I do want to address one thing that you said, which was it can
Yes.
take even longer to kind of undo those patterns. That's not my experience at all. That the patterns of behavior develop sometimes over decades, and it doesn't take anywhere near that long to turn it around. It's conscious, the thing. The difference is the behavior development was not conscious. And so that's the difference. The needs become greater over time. And so you're asked to do more. Sometimes you're plunged into a role, but you're typically not plunged into all of it at once. So some of it gets added on. So that's like, this is a horrendous metaphor. I don't know if you have this metaphor in Australia, but boiling a frog. So you put a frog in a pot of water and you turn it on, and it's not until almost the moment of death that the frog determines that the water is boiling. So it doesn't even think to jump out. It's like that kind of thing. And I know that's a horrible metaphor. I just don't have another one for that. That we don't even realize that we're in hot water until the water is hot. And then there's the fact that when we're caregiving, especially with someone that has a mental health problem, that has a physical health problem, something like that, their need is very clear. They're not asking us to do something because just for the heck of it. They may not even be asking of us. We just might be there, especially like if you're a parent and it's your child and they're born with something. No one's asking you to do anything. It is the natural order of things as a parent that you will care for your child. So there's a need there. And then I don't know about in your culture, but in my culture, especially for women, there's a very much a culture of you are being selfish if you put yourself first. And in America, anyway, if you want to put a woman in her place, you call her selfish. And it's like one of the worst things you can say to a woman. And I really don't understand that. Like saying yes to yourself before you say yes to someone else is actually, I've heard someone say it's self-preservation. Like you're preserving yourself. You're not putting yourself first. You're saying, I want to fuel my tank, or I want to make my cup overflow. And so that I'm not trying to pour from an empty cup, I'm trying to pour from the overflow. Well, I'm the only one who can fill my cup. No one else can do it for me. So if I don't do it, no one else will. So we have this drip over time increase in need. We have this not wanting to be seen as a selfish person because we have this cultural notion that that is bad and wrong. We have this, the need of the person who's receiving the care that maybe they're going to die if they don't get the care. It's something very dire. So there's this whole confluence of factors that affect people in caregiving that aren't really part of the deal in the rest of life. And then if you add to that someone who already before the caregiving role came along was codependent or had people-pleasing tendencies, then it's even magnified more. And I'm sure I'm missing other circumstances, but you have this sort of perfect storm of it becoming almost impossible to build healthy boundaries. And you said set boundaries. And it's funny that something that came to me a few years ago, I was in the middle of a conversation with a client and I said, I don't set boundaries. I have them. And here's what I mean by that. In the beginning, I set boundaries, but they've become internalized as part of who I am and my beingness. This is the internal safety that we've just touched on before, where I feel so situated within me. I know who I am, where I begin, where I end and others begin. I know what's okay, not okay with me, what I want, like, need, and prefer. And I come at the world from that space. Whereas I used to come at the world from, what does he need? What does she need? What do they need? What does the situation need? What does the organization need? What does the cause need? No attention at all to what was going on in here. So I often don't even need to pause when someone asks me something, but that's been my number one tool of recovery and my number one tool of building healthy boundaries, because I don't have to think, because I already know what's okay and not okay with me. I know what my limits are, but it took me some time to internalize that.
I think having boundaries in place or learning from our loved ones as we were growing up around boundaries. And so if you come from an environment where you're unsafe physically, unsafe emotionally, and you witness that people pleasing to a level for safety of the body, it is also an added layer of information that can kind of compound as you're getting older and you step into these roles. And how do you define the difference between being loving and being over responsible?
I love that question. And I asked it in different words when I first got in recovery. I said to this woman, okay, I'm starting to see that there's this continuum of helpfulness, whereby on one end, we've got kindly, helpful, healthy, functional behavior. And on the other end, we've got this dysfunctional, rescuing, fixing, saving, enabling, codependent behavior. And I think I get the difference between the two. Where I get confused is in the middle of that continuum. Where do you flip over, for example, from being helpful to being rescuing? And she said to me, you know, Barb, it really depends. Why are you doing it? Are you helping them just to be helpful? Are you helping them because you want them to like you? And I was like, I am totally doing it just to be helpful. But let me tell you something, Michelle, that question percolated in my brain. And I went, oh, I started observing my behavior and looking at what I was doing and asking myself, like, why am I helping here? And I realized that it wasn't that I wanted them to like me. It was more approval. Like I wanted them to think I was helpful. Like I literally said to somebody one time, like, I'm helpful because I'm nice. I believed that that was the truth. And so what I've learned from that is to ask myself, what's my motive here? Am I doing this because I truly want to be helpful and I have the bandwidth for it? Because if I don't have the bandwidth, it's not just about being helpful. Because why would you go beyond your limits to just be helpful? There's something else going on there. So why am I doing it? And then also, is this serving my highest good? So I identify as pretty strongly as a spiritual person. And so my highest good contributes to the highest good of everyone. So if I'm doing something to my detriment, it's not helping the universe in general, right? I'm not being a good role model as a human being. And for me, honestly, Michelle, the major shift that caused me to be able to go from having no boundaries for 50 something years to having such healthy boundaries that I now coach people is that I've come to care more what I think of me than what other people do, because I was so invested in getting other people's approval that I was willing to throw my integrity out the window and say yes to things I really didn't want to do. I would act like things were okay with me when they were not. I act like I liked things that I really didn't like. I violated my own values. Those are indicators like this is not good. Right? So it's not that I don't care what people think of me. Of course I do. I'm a human. Right? But what I mean is that if I'm going to throw my integrity out the window to get you to approve of me, I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I now approve of me in a way that I didn't even understand that I wasn't really approving of myself. I didn't understand I was violating my own values. I've always thought of myself as a very values-oriented person, and yet I was very dishonest. When I got in recovery, I truly believed I was an honest person. And then when I started looking at my behavior, I realized I lied about drugs, I lied about cigarettes, I lied about alcohol, I lied about relationships, but mainly the vast majority of my dishonesty was in the people-pleasing department. So I was out of integrity with myself. So one of the many ways that I think about boundaries is that when we learn to build healthy boundaries, we're getting into integrity with ourselves. We may be getting back into integrity with ourselves, or we may be getting into integrity with ourselves for the first time. And what I mean by that is we're living our lives in alignment with our values. We no longer abandon ourselves. We no longer abandon our values. And so we are in integrity. And the beautiful thing about the word integrity is that it's another word for wholeness. So we become whole. And guess what? Whole things have boundaries.
That's a light bulb moment. That is a few things when you were talking about loving and being over responsible. When you were talking about self-abandonment and you were talking about not seeing your values as like the first thing that needs to be upheld, I think a part of that is also when you're safety. So you are doing everything or over delivering in spaces because that keeps you safe. That kept you safe as a child, or that kept you safe as a young adult, or because as caregivers, we feel the environment because we're hyper aware of our loved ones, especially if they're on machines or we're having to administer medications for recovery from seizures. You're always on. You're picking up the nuances of their behavior, their eyes. And so yes. So you're hyper vigilant around people's change in mood, tone, the way their body moves in the space. And when you add a layer of the result of not being aware and adjusting and doing more, puts you in an unsafe situation. I think that self-abandonment becomes the external safety because you don't feel internally safe. And for caregiving and caregivers, there's a subtle version that is easily missed when we're looking at self-abandonment. From your perspective, what does that look like?
Self-abandonment really means a couple things. It means one, you're neglecting your physical, mental, and emotional beingness. And it also means that you cave in to your old pattern because you're seeking a sense of relief in your physical body over a sense of self-respect because it feels threatening to change your ways. This is especially true if you've grown up with some kind of trauma. So my main 12-step recovery program is called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. And the way that I describe that is it's a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. I didn't even know that I qualified for it. I didn't know I had intergenerational family dysfunction or childhood trauma. And when that happens, you grow up being hypervigilant, which is what you were talking about. So if you've grown up being hypervigilant and then you become a caregiver, it cranks up your hypervigilance and you become attuned to everything outside of yourself as opposed to inside of yourself because you don't have the capacity, especially if you grew up being hypervigilant. You are hypervigilant for safety's sake, then you're attuned to the outside world, to the complete disconnection and neglect of the inside world. So the body's like, look, we don't have time for thinking. We got to act. We got to either fight or we got to flee. And so what that means is we can't think rationally. This is why when we're really upset or we're really angry, we can't think clearly because your animal is not supposed to. So when you are in a hypervigilant state, you're usually in fight or flight mode, and your body is not meant to be in that mode for years on end, for decades on end. And so you're fried, and it's really hard to pay attention to what's going on internally and what you need. So a lot of this is happening physiologically. And I think when I understood that, it takes a lot of the sting out of, there's no blame for you. You're not a bad person because you became a people pleaser. You're someone who's in survival mode, but you can also turn that around. And I'm living proof of that. I didn't even understand any of this stuff until I was well in my 50s. And as I said earlier, I was trying my entire life. So we're trying to go against what's happening physiologically to our bodies. And then there's the social pressure because what are people going to think of me if I take the day off or I go away for 2 weeks for respite because my system is on fire 24 hours a day because I'm a caregiver of multiple people. So we've got the physiological thing that we're trying to interrupt, and then we've got the social pressure and all of the internalized beliefs. So for me, and I've never been a caregiver, but when I started building boundaries, never mind actually setting them, the idea of saying no caused my internal system to go aflame. And I think of it as an internal emergency. And my thought was, they're going to think that I'm a bad person. I did not want people to think I was a bad person. And when I unpacked it more, I realized I thought a bad person says no and is unhelpful because that was my training. How dare I not be helpful. Like it was not an option for me to not be helpful. And so I had to overcome that. And so when I talk about internal safety, I'm talking about that internal emergency doesn't happen for me anymore. I'm going to give you an actual example from today. I was over at my sweetheart's house and I was sitting down, I was eating my lunch. My phone was next to me, face up, and he was telling me a story. And a text message came in and I looked at it and then I went back to eating, and he literally stopped in the middle of a sentence and got up and went in the other room. And I said, "Hold on, where are you going?" That was just a spam text message that took my attention. I was listening. And from the other room, he goes, "I'm okay." And I said, "Well, you stopped in the middle of a sentence and got up and left. So that doesn't feel like you're okay." And he 10 seconds later came back in the room, sat down, and resumed his story. So in the past, if he had done that, I would have lapped up and gone after. I literally would have chased him and tried to fix the situation, rescue, because I would have felt like I'm a bad person because I looked down at my phone when a text message came in. In 2026, who is not programmed to do something? Like, just I looked at it. I didn't open it up. I just glanced and saw, oh, that's a spam message, right? And I didn't do that. And even if I hadn't run in there and done that, I wouldn't have addressed it. I would have just swept it under the rug. I wouldn't have said anything. But I said to him, and I said, "Facts. Here's what I saw. I saw you get up and leave and stop in the middle of a sentence. That happened. That does not look like I'm okay." And I was like, I went for a walk after that because I was going to meet someone. And I remember thinking about it, like in the past, that would have been a relationship emergency. That would have been an internal emergency for me. But I didn't even, in no moment in any of that exchange, did I have any adrenaline or cortisol. In other words, my body has been retrained, because that right there would have been an absolute emergency for me. So I learned through recovery that I was codependent everywhere, in my family and my friendships and my workplace, but it was really, really evident in my romantic relationships. So for this to happen in the context of a romantic relationship, which, by the way, this is the first and only healthy romantic relationship. We've been together for 7.5 years, and I had no idea that this level of intimacy and communication and vulnerability was possible in a relationship. And I think if this was the first couple months of my relationship with him, it would have been a very different reaction, because I'm 7.5 years older. I have 7.5 years more experience in this relationship and with boundaries and as a boundaries coach. Like, I know that that's not a caregiving example, but I'm sure if you're a caregiver who has poor boundaries and you hear me tell that story, it would have messed with you too.
100%. Because it's that feeling of doing something wrong at times. It's that, and your body it gets like panicky, and you're like, why do I feel panicky? And you're trying to address the feeling of the panic rather than because you don't want to feel the panic.
Because to us, the panic signals, my body is telling me that I've done something wrong. And so what we want is connection to the other person over connection to ourselves. So self-abandonment is disconnection from self. It's prioritizing my connection, my relationship with that other person over connection to myself, because somehow we've internalized the belief that's what's required here. But really, real connection to others requires connection to self. Because if you're disconnected from yourself in a relationship with someone, you're not really there. So you're not really in the relationship. Another way to say that is, what I realized, Michelle, is when I stopped abandoning myself, I stopped being terrified of abandonment, because I wasn't abandoned any longer. The other person may reject me or leave me and abandon me. That could happen. Let's hope it doesn't. But I haven't abandoned me. I haven't built abandonment into the relationship. And then I mentioned before, I'm a spiritual person. I have a higher power. So when I'm connected to me and I'm connected to a higher power, I'm doubly, maybe like quintuply, not abandoned. So if someone does abandon me, I don't feel like I'm going to fall apart, because I've got my own back. I follow through for me. I take care. I know I can count on myself. So I'm not prioritizing my connection to the other person over connection to me. That's not selfish. That's saying I want to be fully here and present with you when I'm connected to you. But when we're abandoning ourselves, we're either doing something to our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual detriment, or we're going back to the old pattern, prioritizing relief from that sense of panic over taking care of making sure we're doing the right thing for us. Because just because we have discomfort doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. It means it's new behavior. It's outside of the old pattern. And there's two different kinds of discomfort. There's the discomfort that comes with a long time of dysfunction. Like, this doesn't feel right to me. I keep putting myself in harm's way by neglecting myself, etc. That kind of discomfort is typically never ending unless you do something drastic to change it, and it's going to get worse over time. Then there's the discomfort that comes with growth, with changing our behavior. That discomfort is finite if you actually are growing, because it's uncomfortable until you get used to it, and then it's no longer discomfort. And on the other side of that discomfort, that finite, eventually ending discomfort, is healing and growth. So you're going to have discomfort, either the discomfort of dysfunction that's never ending or the discomfort of growth, which is finite. Which one are you going to pick? The one that's going to get worse over time, or the one where there's going to be healing and growth on the other side? So you pick your discomfort.
And I think when you're talking about the discomfort and being able to recognize the difference between the two is also really important, because growth, moving towards something better, pushing yourself outside your comfort zone that you've been sediment in or you've been used to, comes with a different type of discomfort. It's more of an uncertainty. What could be there? There can be a little bit of excitement, a little bit of nerves. It just feels like you're going into something unknown. And so you're right. You stay in the discomfort that causes you distress and ongoing turmoil? Or do you push past that ceiling and that boundary of learning something new so that you can develop something powerful, something that holds insight?
So when you said push past, that makes it sound like we're white knuckling it. That's not what I'm advocating at all. This is where the internal safety comes in. So what is it that you need to feel safe so that you can push through this growth discomfort to get to the other side? So often it's something for your nervous system. So
Yes.
you see that I'm putting my hand on my chest right now. This is often a big intervention for me, because what happens for me first thing is I feel pressure on my chest. I have to shallowly breathe. I have a hard time catching my breath. So this is why pausing is so important, because when we pause, when we catch our breath, we are essentially physiologically calming down, coming out of fight or flight mode, and we're telling ourselves in the language of the body, I am safe. And we're also able to access our frontal lobe. So we need to do something to calm our body, and often that is do something to get into the present moment. So connect to your senses, connect to your breath, because you can't do those things other than intentionally in the present moment. It also often includes saying something to her. Instead of saying things like, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm doing this, I need to say yes, they're going to think that I'm a bad person and they're never going to like me again. Turn all that stuff off. And this takes time. And say things like, I get to take care of myself. This is not my emergency. Whatever you need to say. I'm not a bad person. I get to take care of I get to be loved just like everybody else does. Just because I'm taking care of myself now doesn't mean I don't care about them, or doesn't mean I'm going to neglect them. In fact, it means I'm going to have more to give to them. This is why in airplanes, they say, if you're caring for someone else and the oxygen mask falls down, put the mask on yourself first so that you don't pass out and can put the mask on the person you're caring for. They don't say that part so you're not passed out. Maybe they should, so people would really get it. But when you fill your cup first, you get to pour from the overflow rather than from an empty cup. The thing, like when you were talking, I had this feeling like my experience anyway, is that when I get that moment of panic, the discomfort is actually greater than that drip discomfort of I'm exhausted and have been giving and giving because I'm used to that level that maybe is increasing a little bit, but I get this flood when I think of saying no. So we can feel like in the moment it's worse than the other type of discomfort that we have because we've gotten used to it. The water isn't quite boiling yet, but it's about to boil. Whereas that flood feels like I just got splashed with boiling water. So sometimes it can be very tricky there. And one thing that we can do is take time to reflect what just happened. What happened there when I thought about saying no? Or what happened there when I said yes for the 57th time?
And I guess before, when I was talking about pushing through that ceiling, I was moving through to talk about the absence of internal safety because of the impacts of our body, which we've just discussed, which is that it feels more of a crisis when we're trying to do something different because it's sudden. And for me, I feel like that's the absence of internal safety or the absence of learning how to make yourself internally safe. And caregivers are often dealing with systems, healthcare, family dynamics, sometimes trauma histories. How do you keep the conversation compassionate and non-blaming while still empowering them to change?
So you mean like if I were coaching someone, how do I keep it
Yeah.
compassionate and non-blaming? So I often talk from my own experience so people can understand, like, I really get what you're talking about and I know that it's what's happened. But also I say things like, you are not a bad person. You deserve to be cared for. And usually most people are like, well, what? Like the idea that they also deserve care. Like you are not being a bad person. And then there was a phrase that I learned. I think I heard it on a podcast, a recovery podcast very early in my recovery, and it changed everything for me. Here's the phrase. This is info, not ammo. So when I would think of putting myself first and I would think, oh my God, they're going to think I'm a bad person. Like that thought is information, not ammunition. It's information for me to internalize, integrate, and grow from. It's not ammunition to beat myself up. It's not a true thought. Or when I learn that, like I learned that people pleasing was dishonest and manipulative. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a horrible person. I'm not a horrible person. I'm a person who learned these ways. So it's manipulative to be people pleasing because we're doing things for the express purpose of getting people to be pleased with us. That is called manipulation. We are not a bad person when we say yes when we really mean no, because we're doing it to protect our safety. And also, we didn't realize that I didn't even know I was a people pleaser. When I heard the term, I was like, I never heard that. And I didn't think it applied to me. But as time went on, I was like, oh my God, I'm the quintessential people pleaser. So I wasn't doing these things purposefully. But now that I understand, I get to get myself back into integrity and no longer manipulate and lie to people. So I think helping people to understand where this came from, that this is a lifelong pattern. Many of us learned it in childhood because we didn't feel safe and we were seeking safety for ourselves. That's a good thing. We want everybody to feel safe. And so what we've done often is dedicated ourselves to other people's safety. So this is a pattern that's been learned and it's not anybody's fault. So I mentioned intergenerational family dysfunction. So this came to me through my parents, but it came to them through their parents. And so this is intergenerational. And so my parents literally did the best they could. It wasn't good enough, but that's not because they're bad people. It's because they did the best they could with the tools they had. And so what I've learned is new tools. I remember thinking a couple years in recovery, like I didn't have any coping skills. Yes, I did. They were bad and unhealthy coping skills. My coping skills were things like manipulating and lying and doing drugs and saying yes to things I didn't really want to do. They were things like compromising myself and therefore having to soothe my nervous system with drugs and alcohol and food because my system was aflame all the time. I thought that I got high as a teenager because I was cool. Now I'm like, I was traumatized. That's what was going on there. So I think one of the ways to come at this to help people understand that with compassion is to help them understand this is a long time coming. It came from somewhere. You didn't develop these tendencies or these qualities because you're a bad person. You developed them to take care of yourself, to be protective, and you get to be included in the people who you care for.
Really like that you get to be included. In Radiant Moments and Jamie Inspired, we talk about being part of the care plan too, that the caregiver needs to be a part of that creation of a care plan to make sure that their health, well-being, spirituality, and physical being is being protected just as much as the person they're caring for, because what happens if that person falls? And you gave 3 micro tools that I love because they work in real life. Pausing, let me think about it, and setting boundaries sooner. We talked about the pause and the foundational importance of giving yourself time to pause so that you can interrupt your nervous system in its heightened state. For caregivers listening, can you give examples of what pausing looks like without it needing to be dramatic or confrontational, so that it's subtle and they can do it without anybody realizing?
Yeah, absolutely. And my favorite is to say something like, let me get back to you. Just built-in pause. But I also want to say, Michelle, that learning to pause can be a long journey. I say that when me learning to pause was like learning how to climb Mount Everest. And what happened, and I want to take a moment to describe what happened for me, is I learned that pausing was a thing. I was like, excellent idea. Love it. No idea how to do it. So one day I was like, oh, that situation 3 weeks ago, that would have been a good time to pause. So I saw the window closing between when I could have paused and when I realized, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. Like maybe I'm going to figure it out like a couple minutes after, and then eventually I'll be able to do it. And that's what happened. But it wasn't like I learned to pause and then I paused from then on. It was like I paused once and then I didn't pause. And now I feel like I have a built-in pause. So just know that learning to pause isn't like you flip a light switch and you can pause. It's not like that. I did this boundary boot camp on January 1st, and I did a little bit. I was like, okay, here's your challenge for the next month, for the month of January. And so I'm going to say to you, I'm going to challenge your caregiving listeners for the next month after you listen to this. I want you to do an experiment. 100% of the time, when someone asks you to do something, you get a request, I want you to automatically say, even if it's something you absolutely have the bandwidth and are excited to do, I want you to say, let me get back to you. And I want you to do that as an experiment, because there are going to be feelings that are going to come up. Even when it's something you're saying, I'm saying, let me get back to you, even to something I have the bandwidth for, I know that I want to do it. You can get back to them in 2 minutes. It's okay. But I want you to have the experience of what comes up internally for you when you say, let me get back to you. Because learning how to manage those feelings, that sense of panic that comes up, that's the task. What do I do to care for myself, to create a sense of internal safety for myself when those feelings come up? But having phrases like, let me get back to you, let me think about it, or here's another one, I can't do that, but I can do this. That's sort of a way of pausing, because onus is now on them to make the decision. Because most of the time, I call that naming the terms of the engagement. When you put it back on them, chances are, if you've said, I can't do that, but I can do this, chances are they're going to take the yes from you, the thing you're saying yes to.
Yes, making sure that if it's like, I can't do it at all, but next week I can do. If that's outside my scope of whatever I can manage, but I can go and pick up the grocery run when I do my grocery run. I think that that's really important for caregivers to know, that it's okay to also voice what they can do. If they still would like to support that person, but they can't do it in the way they need right there, that It is okay to do that, and learning to be okay with not just automatically saying yes, and being able to pick up on the cues when we're having those moments where we want to say yes, but we know we just don't have the capacity, and that battle between you don't want to let them down, but you don't want to let yourself down, that needs that space. And I really like the challenge that you're putting forward of saying, I'll get back to you. And even if it's a minute later or 2 minutes later, it just gives you that unexpected pause that you're talking about and naming it differently. And when we were talking earlier about that it can take time to do these things, I think it's also important to recognize that if there is an intention, if you don't have the intention to make the change and you do it once and then you don't do it again, that change can't occur. And you might in 90 days try one more time. It actually takes a dedicated decision. Yes, it takes commitment from you to make the change. And that time to actually get there, sometimes it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes we miss it. But it's important to then come back with intention and pick it back up, not wait 60, 90, 120 days before realizing that I've stopped doing that thing that I promised myself I would do.
And I'd actually like to just briefly deconstruct that. So we want to go from self-deprecation to self-compassion. Well, when we say this is information for me, we're being curious. And I love curiosity because it's neutral. Well, if you want to build a bridge from self-deprecation to self-compassion, build it on curiosity. So that's what I love about that. That took me a long time to figure out what was happening with the info, not ammo. And that's really what it's about. It's being curious. What could I do differently next time? What is we could say, why did I do that? Often we just end up beating ourselves up, but asking what could I do differently next time? Maybe what was that about? I don't really know, as long as we're not using it as ammo.
Yes, not using it to harm ourselves or to make ourselves feel less than. I really like that framing of this is information, not ammunition, because you're right, it's kindness there. It's not judgment. It's not assigning any labels to what's happening. It's just the ebb and flow of information. And the moment a caregiver starts shifting patterns, there's often pushback from others and from their own guilt. Just briefly, can we talk about guilt and what the difference between guilt that's a healthy signal and guilt that's a trained response?
Guilt, like healthy guilt, is you've done something that is wrong and you feel badly about it and you probably intend to clean that up. Right. But the guilt that comes from sometimes we feel guilty before we even from thinking about setting boundaries. And then we feel guilty when we set boundaries. And really the antidote to that is to stop abandoning yourself. So we feel like I was teaching this before I understood this is what I was teaching. The way that I teach my clients is that I have them, before we start coaching, I have them identify their top 5 values, because they then use their values as almost like guardrails or guideposts for when and where to set boundaries and when and where to make decisions. And what we're talking about is like getting into integrity with yourself. It is a lot easier to stand strong and firm in something that is because you really believe in it, like your values, because your particular bundle of values is yours for a reason. And so the guilt that we feel when we think about setting boundaries and when we set boundaries is not because we've done something wrong. It's because we're changing a pattern, because we have a belief that we're doing something wrong, probably because we get this panic feeling inside of us. And sometimes people are trying to tell us that we've done something wrong by setting boundaries. And then that makes it even harder. So that's like the pushback from internally. My system is trying to tell me that I'm feeling guilty, and then that person. And when it comes to internally, it's the nervous system stuff we were talking about, the self-talk. We're saying, I'm not being a bad person. Self-2, I get to be included in the care that I give. I get to be loving to myself too. And then the way to handle the pushback from other people most of the time is simply to repeat whatever you just said. I'm not available. And if somebody asks you why not, you do not have to explain. I say, I'm just not. And ideally, we say this in a nice, even tone, the way I'm saying, like, I'm not available. maybe you haven't heard me. I'm not available. If sometimes we need to kind of increase our firmness, sometimes we need to increase the volume so that people will hear us. I'm a huge fan of politeness. I think I heard a million years ago, politeness is like the grease on the wheels of social interaction. I 100% believe that. But sometimes you have to throw politeness out the window. And that's typically when someone is toxic, when they're inebriated, when they just won't take no for an answer, when someone's safety is at stake. Screw politeness and go right to being rude. So if you're trying to set a boundary with someone because someone's safety is at stake, yours or theirs, go ahead and yell at them, right? But sometimes we end up yelling because we've been pushed beyond our limits. And so one of my tips, one of them is be polite. And the reason that I say that, Michelle, is that what happens for many people with poor boundaries is they wait and wait until they're pushed way beyond their limits and they explode. And often it works. So they think, oh, that's what boundary setting is. I have to explode. No, you don't. And if you set the boundary sooner rather than later, it's a lot easier to do it calmly rather than waiting until your mind, like your tension has built, the expectations have built. You start saying things like, okay, I'm waiting for the right moment and the right moment isn't coming and maybe I shouldn't really say something. And then their expectation that you're going to follow through on the thing that you said you were going to do is increasing because the time is getting closer. And then, but if you just say, that's not going to work for me, as soon as they ask you to do the thing, your tension goes down. It's polite to them so they know what's actually real and they can manage the situation without you. So being prompt when you set a boundary is much healthier for everybody involved. And it's easier to do it immediately. Stop waiting for the right moment. There's a Chinese proverb that goes like this: the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The next best time is today. Well, the best time to set a boundary with someone was the day that you met them. The next best time is right now.
So true. I like that Chinese proverb. I like that it also kind of provides the outline for where we could have been if we'd done it differently, but that it's totally okay to do it now. And if you could leave caregivers with one sentence for the moment that they feel selfish or bad for having needs, what would you want them to hear?
I would want them to hear, you deserve to have your needs met just as the person you're caring for does. You deserve this just by the mere fact of being born. You don't have to earn being deserving of care and of love. You were born, so you deserve it.
Really feel like there's been some key moments in our discussion around being able to love yourself, being able to recognize your needs so that you can become a part of the care plan, that the information we receive from somebody else or ourselves is just that. It's information, and we don't need to give it weight of positive or negative. It's just an ebb and flow of information that we can then take in, leave, depending on where we are. That the nervous system is a large part of creating boundaries, understanding boundaries, and creating internal safety for ourselves. And to give our listeners where they can find out more about your processes, where can listeners find you and your work? And of course, your podcast if they want to learn more.
Yeah. So I'm only on LinkedIn now.
Mm-hmm.
And my website is higherpowercc.com. I have stuff on romantic boundaries, workplace boundaries, personal boundaries, family boundaries. I have a ton of free stuff. I have moderately priced stuff. And my flagship program is called Unshakable You. It's a 12-week private coaching program. And then, of course, my podcast, Fragmented to Whole, Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery. That's plenty.
Congratulations on your 350th episode on your podcast. That is an amazing achievement and shows your dedication to the work that you're doing and the support that you're offering at all of those different levels for anybody who is at a different stage in their life and where they are financially. That's very supportive, and I'm grateful for you sharing that with our community. Thank you, Barb. I'll make it easy for everyone to find everything in the show notes. This has been such a grounding conversation, and I know it will land with caregivers who are carrying love and responsibility and still trying to stay a person inside for themselves. Today, we've talked about how people pleasing and over responsibility often aren't personality quirks, they're protection strategies. We've talked about the power of the pause and why building internal safety is what makes boundaries actually sustainable. If you're listening and you recognize yourself in this, here's what I want you to remember. You don't have to change your whole life today. You only need one tiny moment where you don't abandon yourself. That could be one pause, one breath, or one let me think about that, one next right step. To everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. You don't have to hold it all alone. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments Caregiver Oasis. Until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself.